Welcome, everyone. I open by acknowledging the traditional custodians of the countries from which we all join today. I'm joining from the beautiful lands of the Gadigal people. I acknowledge Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's history, culture, and continuing connection to land, sea, sky, and community. These are lands that were never ceded. I pay my respects to elders past and present, and to those Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. I'm Kate, and I'm the Research Director at the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales. It's really wonderful to have so many people joining us today from a wide variety of organisations representing community, government, legal, disaster sectors, and people from right across the country. Over the next hour, we'll explore how the legal assistance sector prepares for and responds to disasters. We'll present findings from the Foundation's recent research on disaster-related legal needs, and you can read more about this research in our State of the Evidence report and our recent report on the qualitative study with community legal centres. So following that summary of research findings, we're really delighted to present a panel discussion with Sally, Julia and Melanie, three professionals experienced in this area from legal aid and community legal centre organisations. After the panel discussion, we'll have a short time for you to ask questions, and the chat will become available for you to post your questions when we get to the Q&A section. If you have follow-up comments, information to share or unanswered questions, we really encourage you to reach out to us at the Foundation after the webinar. We hope that this webinar offers an opportunity to unpack these important, complex, and increasingly significant issues, and to consider how you might take these lessons into your own practice and policy work. I'm really proud now to introduce our research team who have worked on this project at the Foundation. The third member of the team, Helen Easton, isn't able to join us today, but we acknowledge her contributions to the research. Dr. Karen Butler is a principal researcher with the Foundation, and you'll meet Karen shortly during the panel discussion. I'm really pleased now to introduce you to Dr. Emily Cothy, who is a senior researcher with us at the Foundation. And Emily's going to share some of the insights and highlights from our recent research. Thanks, Emily.
Thanks, Kate. And hi, everyone. As Kate said, I'm Emily Cothy, and I'm a senior researcher at the Law and Justice Foundation of New South Wales. And before we get to our panel discussion, I wanted to take the opportunity to provide a brief overview of our recent work on natural disaster-related legal need. So disasters create complex and evolving legal needs, many of which persist well beyond the immediate disaster response phase. As climate change accelerates, the frequency and severity of disasters are increasing, and these lead to overlapping crises and compounding legal problems for both individuals and communities. Our research sought to better understand these legal needs and how they change over time, and as Kate said, resulted in two major reports. So the project arose out of conversations with legal assistance providers, including Legal Aid New South Wales, who have spent countless hours in recent years responding to the growing and distinct need for disaster legal assistance in New South Wales and across Australia. It became clear that there was need for a deeper understanding of the volume and nature of natural disaster-related legal problems, and that exploring the capacity and preparedness of the sector was equally important. So our research resulted in two major reports. The first, our State of the Evidence report, brought together an evidence snapshot of existing research and new analysis of disaster response legal service data to explore the volume, nature and distribution of disaster-related legal need. The second, our Community Legal Centres and Disaster Preparedness report, examined how CLCs prepare for and respond to disasters, highlighting challenges in preparedness and opportunities for strengthening legal support. Before I go any further, I do want to acknowledge that the real expertise in disaster legal assistance sits with frontline services, including those you will hear from immediately after me in the panel discussion. Our role in this research was not to claim that expertise, but to highlight and synthesise insights from those working directly with disaster-impacted communities. Across both reports, our focus was on bringing together knowledge from those with on-the-ground experience to provide a clearer picture of legal need and preparedness in the disaster context. We also want to acknowledge that the terminology surrounding disasters is an evolving discussion among researchers and practitioners in disaster and emergency management. In particular, the term natural may imply an absence of human influence, but factors such as population movement into hazard-prone areas and the role of anthropogenic climate change in increasing frequency and intensity of certain disasters must be considered when examining their impact on the Australian community. Despite these considerations, though, we have chosen to use the term natural disaster in this research to align with existing funding arrangements and disaster-related legal assistance mechanisms. Additionally, while climate change has intensified many recent disasters, some events, such as earthquakes, occur with less direct human influence, and legal assistance services have played a critical role in supporting communities affected by both climate-linked and non-climate-linked disasters, reinforcing the need for preparedness across all types of natural disasters. There's a clear evidence that legal need emerges at all stages of the disaster cycle, but it changes over time and is shaped by the characteristics of individual disasters. However, much of what is known about natural disaster-related legal need focuses on the post-disaster phases. Evidence tells us of the legal need that arises after disasters occur, first with an initial surge in legal need, particularly in insurance claims, tenancy issues, and access to disaster relief grants. These issues persist long after the emergency response has ended, leading to a long tail of legal need throughout the recovery phase. International research suggests that the legal problems linked to disasters can continue for more than a decade, meaning that legal assistance providers will continue to support clients with disaster-related issues for many years to come. Our analysis of DRLS data reinforced that insurance disputes are among the most common post-disaster legal issues, accounting for more than half of all legal services provided. However, insurance rarely exists in isolation. There is significant overlap with this legal problem and other issues like tenancy disputes and access to government grants. For example, some people who had building insurance but opted out of flood cover were required to submit an insurance claim just to be rejected, a necessary step to qualify for some New South Wales disaster relief grant. This process delayed access to financial relief and added strain to the insurance system, reinforcing the need for better coordination between disaster assistance schemes. Beyond insurance, legal need varies significantly across different groups. People with disabilities, parents, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and culturally and linguistically diverse communities experience distinct legal needs and may require targeted service delivery approaches. Service utilisation data shows that different groups also prefer different modes of accessing legal help. For example, some may rely heavily on face-to-face assistance through disaster recovery centres, while others prefer remote or telephone-based support. Ensuring services are flexible and accessible is critical to meeting the legal needs of disaster-impacted communities. Our second report, the Community Legal Centres and Disaster Preparedness Project report, explored how CLCs navigate these challenges. The report was based on qualitative interviews with 21 staff from 13 different CLCs across New South Wales. It provided insight into how CLCs experience disaster response and preparedness, as well as some of the barriers and opportunities that they identified. In these interviews, some CLCs respondents described disaster preparedness as an ongoing challenge, with several factors shaping their ability to prepare. Many spoke about funding constraints, noting that limited resources often meant that preparation work had to be deprioritised in favour of urgent client needs. Workforce stability was also mentioned as a challenge, with some staff suggesting that high turnover and reliance on short-term funding limited their ability to sustain disaster preparedness efforts over time. Respondents also reflected on the challenges of community engagement in legal preparedness. They described how many people do not anticipate needing legal help until they're already in crisis, making it difficult to encourage proactive engagement with legal services before a disaster occurs. This aligns with broader research on legal need, where people often don't recognise their problems as legal problems, and it presents a particular challenge in the disaster context. Some interviewees suggested that embedding legal information in broader community preparedness initiatives would be one way to improve engagement. From a broader perspective, many of the challenges described by legal assistance providers, such as community engagement, service accessibility, and workforce capacity, are not unique to the legal sector. Other fields involved in emergency management, such as public health and social work, have developed structured approaches to disaster preparedness and service coordination. established communities, resilience frameworks, and integrated disaster planning models used in these sectors may offer useful insights for strengthening legal preparedness efforts. Respondents identified how embedding legal services within broader emergency management systems, rather than treating them as a separate component, could help ensure that legal needs are addressed as part of a coordinated disaster response. Similarly, CLC respondents highlighted the ways in which structured sector-wide training can help legal assistance providers develop specialist expertise in disaster-related areas of law, including insurance disputes, consumer rights, and tenancy protections. The themes raised in these interviews provide important insight into how legal services experience disaster preparedness and the factors that shape their ability to respond effectively. While there is no single solution to these challenges, the findings reinforce the value of flexibility, strong relationship with other services, and a sustained focus on capacity building within the legal assistance sector. Across both reports, a consistent theme is that legal needs arising from disasters intersect with broader systems of support. While legal assistance providers play a critical role in disaster recovery, their effectiveness is shaped by how well they connect with emergency response systems, financial assistance programs, and community services. Ensuring coordination across these sectors can help ensure that legal support is available when and where it's needed, reducing delays and improving outcomes for disaster-affected individuals. And while this project has now concluded, we hope that its findings will continue to inform discussions about how legal services can best support disaster-affected communities. Strengthening preparedness, coordination, and accessibility will reduce long-term impact of legal problems and ensure that when the next disaster strikes, communities are not only physically prepared, but legally protected as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Emily. We're going to shift gears and hear from our expert panel about how these insights translate into real-world challenges and opportunities. We have a fantastic panel of experts who bring deep knowledge of legal service delivery, advocacy, and disaster response. Let me introduce them. Mel Kalmiar has worked at Mid-North Coast Legal Centre for over 10 years in a variety of roles. As Legal Services Manager, she supports her team in providing legal help across a vast catchment area. Mel played a key role in coordinating her services' response to the 2019 bushfires and 2021 floods, and she remains committed to finding collaborative, flexible, and innovative ways to address unmet legal need. She is also the convener of the CLC New South Wales Disaster Response and Planning Network, supporting CLCs across New South Wales in addressing the legal needs that arise from extreme weather events. Welcome, Mel. Next, we welcome Julia Davis, who is the Senior Policy and Communications Officer at the Financial Rights Legal Centre, where she has worked since 2013 to advise and empower consumers in financial stress. With a Juris Doctorate from the University of Florida and a Master's in Human Rights Law from the London School of Economics, Julia is deeply committed to social justice and ensuring vulnerable people have access to fair financial outcomes. She is also a consumer representative on the Australian Financial Complaints Authority panels and the General Insurance Code governance committees. And our final panellist is Sally Bryant. Sally is a senior solicitor in the Civil Law Division at Legal Aid New South Wales and the manager of the Disaster Response Legal Service. Based in Coffs Harbour, Sally has worked in regional service delivery for over 25 years, developing innovative civil law services, outreach and community legal education programs. Sally established the Disaster Response Legal Service in early 2020 to provide a statewide trauma-informed response to disasters, including the 2019-2020 bushfires and numerous flooding events across New South Wales since 2021. Sally chairs the New South Wales Disaster Legal Assistance Group and works closely with recovery agencies and the legal assistance sector to provide coordinated local responses to disasters. In 2021, Sally was awarded a New South Wales Public Service Medal for outstanding public service to legal aid New South Wales, particularly during the 2019-2020 bushfires. Welcome all of you. Each of our panellists brings a unique perspective on how legal services can better prepare for and respond to disasters. We'll explore issues like legal advocacy, collaboration, workforce training, and community engagement. The discussion will be followed by an audience Q&A, so if a question comes to mind, feel free to note it down for later. So let's jump into our first topic. One of the key takeaways from the research is that small but strategic legal changes can have a big impact in reducing disaster-related legal problems. Julia, based on your experience in consumer law and financial rights, are there specific areas of law or regulation where the legal sector could advocate for small but meaningful changes?
Thanks, Karen. Yeah, look, happy to talk to this. We do a lot of policy and law reform at the Financial Rights Legal Centre, and really it's all focused on financial services, and a lot of my expertise is around consumer insurance. So the first thing I wanted to say is for caseworkers who are here at the webinar, other legal centers, legal aid workers, if you haven't had much experience identifying systemic issues, that's the critical point. I guess the way I would describe a systemic issue is anything that's likely to have an effect on one or more consumers or small businesses in addition to the client right in front of you. So it doesn't have to be something that you've seen over and over again. It doesn't even have to be something that you know is a breach of law. The way we describe it internally to our lawyers is, patterns and repetition does often identify a systemic issue, but also anything that really makes your blood boil, anything that really annoys you, something where you hear a client's problem and there just is no legal solution. When you hear something, there might be something dodgy going on between an agent for an insurer or a builder. Those are often things that if this client's been harmed, I think you can assume other clients might be being harmed as well. And you've really identified a systemic issue. And when you've identified a systemic issue, what do you do with it? You get as much information from the client as you can so that you can write up a de-identified case study, and feel free to pass it on with consent or properly de-identified to other legal centers like ours, where we can think through, is there a way that we could solve this problem for more people than just your one client? So practicing the skill of identifying systemic issues, sharing them with colleagues and saying, what do you think about this? Do you think this is right? Do you think it could be affecting more people? That is really a valuable skill. That is the most value that our services can add in the law reform space, is bringing real, genuine client stories to the forefront. In terms of what small strategic changes could make a difference right now, I would say lean into some of the proposed changes to the General Insurance Code of Practice. There was an independent review of the code in 2024, and they have put forward many recommendations that services like financial rights really support. And some of them, if they end up in the code, I think will do an incredible job preventing legal disputes after a disaster. So one of the recommended changes, for example, is if an insurer has not made a decision on a claim within 12 months and the delay is not due to the consumer or any other reasons beyond the control of the insurer, such as a complaint lodged with AFCA, then the code could require the claim to be accepted. Done. That would obviously, anyone who's had an insurance dispute with a client can imagine how that would simplify things. Another one that's been recommended in the independent review is that temporary accommodation benefits should extend until the building has actually been rebuilt and is habitable again, as opposed to having a hard 12-month cutoff, which is what a lot of policies currently include. So if you don't know much about the General Insurance Code of Practice, you can have a look. The independent review is out there in the public domain, and right now the sector can really do everything possible to put some pressure on the industry to adopt as many of those recommendations as possible, because having a really strong code of practice is going to prevent legal disputes in the future. Yeah, go ahead and jump in. Anyone else?
That's fantastic, Julia. Thank you. I love the way you describe what a systemic issue is. And I particularly like the way in the report Emily has categorized systemic advocacy as part of preparation, because that's really what it is the work that all you consumer advocates do so well, is preparing communities for the next disaster. I just wanted to jump in a little bit about some work on the ground outside of insurance, which is obviously the main game. But I just wanted to give a little example of systemic advocacy on the run. And this was in the 2022 floods up in the Northern Rivers, where we identified an anomaly in the definition of homeowner in the Back Home Grant. And that was a flood relief scheme administered by Service New South Wales, where affected tenants could get $5,000 and homeowners could get $20,000. But caravan owners were defined in the grant definitions as tenants, not homeowners. And if they were uninsured, they'd lost their home. And this was something we identified as a systemic issue. And at the time, we were having weekly Teams catch-ups with the Northern Rivers CLC, who were also doing work on the ground. We were working very closely together. I'd like to talk about that a bit later. But between us, we identified this as an issue. We raised it with Service New South Wales. They changed the definition, and all those homeowners were able to get the 20 grand rather than 15. So, it's exactly what you're talking about there, Julia, is that it affects more than one person, very disadvantaged cohort. So it's great. It's just great to see lawyers out on the ground identifying those issues and then coming together to share them and then make real change. Thank you.
And I'll just polish that off, sorry, Karen, and say, when it comes to making really short, sharp, effective changes, it doesn't always require law reform. We have really constructive relationships with the insurance industry. We talk to regulators like ASIC all the time. We talk to government, and sometimes it is a genuine misunderstanding of what's happening on the ground where we have the expertise and they don't. And so like what Sally said, if you identify a problem and it might just be an error, the best thing you can do is type it up, write it up, and spread it far and wide, and get in touch with who's the agency in charge of that grant, or who's the regulator in charge of this, or who's the insurance company that you're having a problem with, because it could get fixed very quickly. It doesn't require any legislation at all. And then, especially in a disaster scenario, other consumers can start benefiting from that change as quickly as possible.
Thank you, both of you. There's some really great example of some small but impactful changes. Moving on, we know that strong relationships between legal and non-legal services are essential for an effective disaster response. But these partnerships tend to need to be built well before a disaster occurs, not in the middle of a crisis. Mel, can you share with us your experience working at both a local and statewide level, and what practical steps can legal services take to strengthen these relationships in advance?
Sorry, thank you. Thank you so much, Karen. I think we recognise that a lot of disaster impacts happen in communities where relationships are really important. So those relationships that we have on the ground with a range of different stakeholders, and stakeholders from a range of different different sectors, I think is really important to maintain and develop. And I acknowledge that those things are hard to do if you don't have the resources available. So there's a resource decision to make. But we've found it invaluable to be investing in those relationships with mental health services, with local community organisations, local grassroots and council-based organisations that really are responding at the front line of disasters and dealing with things in an ongoing way. So taking time to develop those relationships, attending interagencies, in maintaining connections through just good collaboration, good conversation, turning up to events, and sometimes participating in events that aren't instinctively obvious for your other legal service delivery. So we've attended events that the RFS have run, for example, in local communities, the Get Ready days. We've attended some that were more aimed at community building around food provision and how you respond in the first few days after a disaster. That we've attended those because it's about developing connections, developing relationships, and staying informed and engaged with what's happening in the community, because we realise that people don't instinctively think of their issues as legal issues. And so having that opportunity to have the relationship established so that when something happens, you are a person they might call. And we may not always be the right people to help them, but we've got some other networks as well. And our networks with legal aid, with our pro bono partners, with specialist services like financial rights and others who are experts in the fields that people need help with urgently. So we, through our networks, can act as a good channel to help people get the help that they need. We're also trying to make sure that we keep offering community legal education, CLE, that is focused on disaster preparedness. Now, sometimes that means that we put our preparedness topics into other topics, so that someone might attend something, for example, about powers of attorney and enduring guardianship, planning ahead. They're thinking about decision making at a time when they may not be able to make decisions for themselves. And into that conversation, we can talk about things like, well, how do I store my documents? So all the work that Justice Connect did, for example, to get their e-prepared suite underway and help educate people about where you might keep your documents in the cloud so that you can find them if you need them. So we might also talk, if we're doing a CLE about debt, that we can talk about debts that arise out of a disaster scenario and the fact that there are ways that you can address that. So we try to make sure that all of the information that we have, we can tailor it to the area and the response or the group that we're speaking with. But I think the most important thing overall really is just about, that the importance of community, the importance of connections, and CLCs do that on the ground really well. They already have some stakeholder engagement strategies, and I just encourage those who are with us today to think about, using those networks in order to help people think about disaster preparedness, because it's so much better to be keeping that conversation going in light of the fact that we're going to have more experiences like the ones that we've already had. Collaboration, resources, being willing to be creative and flexible, I think, are the keys.
Thanks so much, Mel. There's some really helpful strategies. Before we move on, I'd love to hear if any of our other panelists have insights on what's worked in their experience.
Will I jump in first, Julia, or do you want to jump in? Yeah. Mel, that was just brilliant. And I really can't add much to what you've said. I think your words that the importance of community and connections can't ever be overstated. I think that's exactly what it's about. The only thing I'd add is that, and I know that Emily or the foundation talks about this in the report, is the uncertainty of funding. There's often funding after disasters for community workers, and there's often communities that are quite flush with funds in the first couple of years. And so there's a lot of workers in local councils and community organisations that are actually funded specifically to do casework with disaster impacted people. So that I think they're really great organisations to become familiar with and then become familiar with us. They're called the RSS workers, which stands for Recovery Support Services, and in councils they're called CROWS. There's a lot of acronyms, but jumping into those groups is a really great way to meet the community. But I got nothing more to add. It was great. Thanks, Mel.
That's all right. Actually, I just realised, if I may, on that, many councils have continued, even after many years after the disaster, really, that they have continued to offer small community-based networks. For example, in one of our communities, there's a thing called the Small Communities Network, and it is a network of people who are just members of the community who feel that they want to stay across the issues and to be prepared. So some councils have invested in support for those communities. They've got a person who's employed to continue. So even almost 5 years down the track, there in some places there are groups really advocating for ongoing preparedness action. And if your council has got one of those, then that community recovery officer is a really, really key person to get to know.
And I'll just add one quick comment that in the disaster space, because of the funding that is often available for disaster services, I don't mean this to sound confrontational, but I think sometimes services can get quite territorial after a disaster because they're doing the hard work, they're on the ground, um, and they don't want other services to like muscle in uninvited, I guess. But the truth is, I think they need help. And as much as other services like ours, who are specialist and remote based, that we can offer help behind the scenes, I think you build really robust relationships with services that way, where you say, we've got lots of fact sheets, feel free to brand them as your own and pass them out to community so that people call you because you're on the ground and you know the issues. But we can give you legal information about insurance, like use it how you need to. I think that being really like taking the ego out of it and just saying, how can we help people on the ground as much as possible? Those are the types of things that other services remember. And they go, oh, we didn't have to get defensive when you came around. You weren't muscling in. You actually just gave us all these great resources and we were able to use them how we wanted to. I think makes a big difference because we have found we've been kind of doing disaster work for, I don't know, I've been doing it for 12 years now at Financial Rights. And in the early days, I think we did muscle in a bit. And no one appreciates that. They're like, who are you? You're not here. You're not in the Blue Mountains. Like, what are you doing here? And instead, we've built really much stronger relationships later on by saying, call us if your workers need training up, or if you want fact sheets, or like we'll send you anything you need. We're here if you need us. And then we just stay out of it until we're invited. And I just think that is a better way to build those lasting relationships.
Thanks so much, Julia. That's a really great point. The problem is big and it's going to require everybody for a solution. Thank you for sharing, Mel and Sally too. The next question is, Sally, I'm going to direct this one to you. So the prepared legal sector, it's not just about systems and policies, right? It's about ensuring frontline staff have the right skills to respond effectively when a disaster hits. From your perspective, Sally, what types of training should be prioritised across the sector to ensure legal services are equipped to handle the most common disaster-related legal issues?
Sorry. Thanks, Karen. That's a great question. I think there's three main types of training that are all critical. The first is trauma-informed practice. All solicitors doing this work should have trauma-informed practice training and training on managing the risk of vicarious trauma. This work is difficult. It's exhausting, and it's really important that we get it right for clients who've been through a disaster, but it's also really important that we look after our staff who are doing this really difficult work. So trauma-informed practice is number one. The second limb, of course, are the technical legal skills. Emily outlined the sort of main legal issues that we see in the disaster response legal service. Emily's first report summarised our work over the last 5 years. Insurance is 50% of the work we do, so it goes without saying that that is probably the most important piece of technical training that lawyers should be across. More recently, eligibility for disaster grants, and that includes the Resilient Homes program that's been running in the Northern Rivers for a while now, and it's just been rolled out in the Central West. They're quite complex areas of law. They're new and emerging areas of law. The appeal process is not straightforward. So again, training in government grants, how to advise clients about eligibility, but also how to appeal decisions is really important. Housing and tenancy is the third highest area that we do. 18% of our matters are about rent reductions, abatements, evictions, urgent repairs. And then, as the first report sets out, clients often come with a whole bundle of other legal issues. They don't come with just one. So there's a lot of issues around financial hardship, debts, fines, workplace rights. We see far more questions about neighbours and trees than I would like to talk about. Family and domestic violence. And then, of course, issues like business and commercial leasing that are outside the expertise or guidelines of legal aid, but still things that we advise on in the first instance. So training on those is really essential. And then the third limb of what's crucial training, I think, are the more practical things. And they are, how do you make a referral to pro bono? How do you use the Justice Connect portal? How do you refer to financial counsellors and find the nearest one in your area? And how do you deliver engaging CLE? So they're sort of the three limbs of what I think are the most important and crucial things to train lawyers on before they go out to recovery centres. Now, look, ideally, these would all be done on a regular basis across the sector. I know that that's difficult, and we've talked about the problems of staffing and yeah. So look, ideally, it's done regularly across both legal aid and CLCs and ALSs. At legal aid, we have what we call COPs, which are communities of practice, and we often we often invite CLCs and other legal assistance providers to come along to those. I think it's crucial also to talk about having up-to-date accessible resources for clients as well as training for lawyers. We really need to have those client-facing documents ready to go, and they're often really helpful for lawyers as well. Just an example of that, last year we worked with the Tenants Union to create a housing booklet on housing and tenancy issues after disaster. It's a really brilliant publication. I'll put it in the chat later if you like. It's available to everyone. Thanks heaps to the Tenants Union for their expertise in helping us develop that. But they're the kinds of things that are really important to have ready to go. The other thing I'd say about our training is that in addition to the usual, I suppose, suite of resources, we have videos and podcasts. They're available on the YouTube channel, so we can share them with our external legal assistance sector partners, which we've done regularly with our CLCs and ALS partners and other partners in other states. I'm told the podcasts are very popular when lawyers are driving long distances to recovery centres to give them a bit of a refresher. It's also really useful to know where disaster resources are, because there's a whole lot of stuff out there already. Financial Rights have got excellent resources. Tenants Union have got excellent resources. There's actually a knowledge hub, a disaster knowledge hub at Justice Connect, just for lawyers. They've got really excellent resources, and they often create fact sheets for areas of law that come up during a disaster that we might alert them to that are outside. They're very niche problems that are outside our expertise. So, for example, in the last couple of years, they've provided or developed fact sheets on private roads and bailment and that kind of thing, which is really, really helpful. Just before I wind up, I did want to talk about the training for solicitors on the ground when they are out doing disaster work, be it at a recovery centre or a community event. And I just wanted to talk a little bit about our work during the 22 floods. At the peak of service delivery during that time, there were 11 recovery centres and 20 recovery assistance points open at the same time. That's across northern New South Wales and Greater Sydney. We worked very closely with the Northern Rivers CLC and the Western Sydney CLC to staff those centres. And we set up a Teams channel so that all lawyers on the ground could post questions, even if it was I've arrived safely or 5 insurers are here today. They might say a new grant's been announced, or just generally to check in to see how people are going, but also to ask legal questions. And on top of that, we set up a weekly casework meeting via Teams, usually late in the afternoon after centres had closed, just to brainstorm those emerging legal issues, workshop anything complex. And Julia, you'd be happy to hear, to raise systemic issues. And so those meetings worked really well. And that's how we often were able to identify things that were happening on the ground that we could possibly nip in the bud. And on top of that, we offered a phone a friend service. So I think that's quite a lot to talk about in training. But I guess to summarise, Karen, and I know Mel and I were talking about this the other day, and Mel asked when is the ideal time to train staff in recovery work. And I think, all the time, but have your resources ready to give refreshers as needed. Thank you.
Can I just jump in and just add to that, Sally, with a lot of gratitude because you made your suite of training material available to us as a regional CLC when we were attending some of those disaster recovery centres. And your training and the training that Financial Rights offered, and all the resources that were made available by others, Tenants Union, and so many others, really was responsive, but it was also quick and it was so accessible. And I think that's just a really important key thing for us all to remember, that in responding to disasters, we're not doing it alone. We are really doing it as collaboration. And I think it's made it really effective, and get the help to the people who've needed it.
That's just such great news to hear how much collaboration is going on in the sector. I mean, clearly nobody can do it all themselves. So it's great to see so many people reaching out and helping across the sector. We have time for just one last question. So a key challenge identified in the research was this perceived lack of demand for disaster preparedness initiatives that are targeted at clients. So many legal services reported that communities were hesitant to engage in legal education about disaster readiness. Despite this, some services have found some really effective ways to reach communities. And we heard, I think, Mel, you were sharing some of those strategies too. But I'd just love to hear from each of you, what collaborations or strategies has your service used to engage communities in disaster preparedness?
I might start. I've got just a quick example. So last year, I was invited to go do a community education session in Newcastle because they had just redone some flood mapping. And as you could maybe assume, insurance is not really the issue that fires up the community and gets them out to a community center. It's often a grudge purchase. It's not something that many people think about until they have to. So getting people to think about insurance before a disaster is pretty challenging. But I was really amazed to find that when I got there were people just lined up out the door. I mean, over 100 people from the community came to listen to me talk about insurance. And I ended up talking to people who'd been in their same house for 30 years, all the way down to people who'd just bought a place. And they were really engaged and interested and asking lots of questions about insurance and how it works and, how do you shop around and what's effective and what to worry about. And I think the trigger was the new flood mapping and that the council had done a lot of community engagement to tell people this is coming, this could affect your insurance, if you want information, come to this session. So I actually think there's a real opportunity here, especially for place-based CLCs, to engage with the local councils and see if they are redoing flood maps, if they are redoing their BAL ratings, if they are thinking through development plans, because there could be a real opportunity for the community to get engaged and come listen to things that they would normally find pretty disengaging.
Can I just do a quick shout out for the connections I think that we've had with some local mental health service providers, those who are responding and were funded to respond to the disasters that they'd experienced. And the fact that many people who we have come in contact with and continue to come in contact with who don't realise that their problem is a legal problem, but they are experiencing trauma, they're experiencing that sense of hopelessness, I guess, and concern over their future, and that will often engage with a mental health service. And so I think our connections with mental health services have been really important because there's the chance for cross referrals, for us to get the support from those counselling service providers and for them to be able to make a referral for legal help. So that's just another key connection, I think, that and a way to be creative in terms of where people go who are impacted by disasters. They often will look for mental health help first.
I'll jump in very briefly, Karen, because I know we're at time. I totally agree with both Mel and Julia that we need some kind of hook, that people aren't going to come out at night to a hall and watch someone present slides unless there's some kind of extra hook. And for us, that was the hay bale giveaway in Eugowra in the Central West, or a free birth certificate day, those kinds of events where you can join up with another service. I think that's always, it's always best to work with another service and get out there. That's I think that's pretty much the song sheet we're singing from today, is all about working together.
Fantastic. Thank you. Look, a huge thank you to our panelists for sharing their expertise and experiences today. We hope that what we've shared today, that you can take back to your own organisations and networks, because building resilience is something we all have a role in. So thank you very much. I'm going to hand back now to Kate for the Q&A part of our afternoon.
Thank you so much. And thanks to Emily and Karen for sharing your insights to the research. And Mel, Sally and Julia, what a privilege to be able to reflect on some of those real world experiences. We have opened up the chat for the audience. So if you have a question for our researchers or our panelists, please add it in now. The first question, I think, will be appropriate for all three of our panelists. I might also note that we can perhaps send out a list of some resources. We'll send out a recording of this webinar to all of you who have signed up and who are part of the audience today, and perhaps we'll provide some links to resources when we do that. Leading into the question for the panel, are there any great resources that you might be able to recommend to community legal centres around developing disaster management plans? Who would like to go first? Melly,
I'll just say in response to that, it's a great question. It is something that is in fact on my mind a bit. I know that there is a fantastic organisation that distributes, and I think it's AIDR, who distribute lots of resources and lots of information about disaster related topics, and there are things in there. So it is something that our legal centre has been thinking about. We're mindful of it. But in terms of moving forward with something structured and a plan in place, we're still in the early phases. So I think one of the problems that we as other legal centres have is not being resourced to have the time and the focus to do some of that work. And it's actually really strategic work, and it's really important. Sally and Julia may have other thoughts or other ideas on it, but yeah, I acknowledge that that's a really great question.
Yeah, it is. It's a great question. The next question comes from Evelyn, who's a private solicitor, and I think taps into quite a lot of your reflections, Mel, Sally, and Julia, about the complexity of the work that is done in these spaces. And, it really struck me listening to all of you that this is not just about lawyering, right? It's not just about a kind of technical skill set. There is so much around supporting people through perhaps the most awful days of their lives and beyond, and supporting people when the media and perhaps the public eye has moved on. So thinking about the complexity of that work and all that's involved, are you aware of any work that is being done to support solicitors and perhaps private solicitors in that space? Evelyn's suggested the Law Society, but perhaps others.
I think that this is generally available through National Legal Aid. There's a service, an online training resource called With You. I think that's the name of it. Sally, correct me if I'm wrong. Which is about 3 hours worth of really good training in trauma response, like how to be a trauma-informed practitioner. I think that's a really great start. So, and maybe it's something that we can share in the links afterwards. But that and getting to know your local counselling services, mental health practitioners, I think is also really important.
Thanks, Mel.
I might just add that this isn't a resource, so sorry, Evelyn, but it is something we've learned over the last couple of years since COVID is, so much of our work now can and is done remotely. And so it's a whole new element of being a lawyer, and vicarious trauma is really thinking through how do you support your staff when they are taking these calls, alone at their kitchen table. Because these can be really difficult calls. They can be really shocking scenarios that you are sitting with someone through. And I think it is critical that all of our legal centers have support networks available for our remote working staff, and that they can access instantly. We always have a supervising solicitor that you can put the phone down and call them at any time, because I just think it's 10 years ago, we might have gone to a disaster service center and been there in person, and we always have someone to debrief with after. But now a lot of the advice we're giving is remote, and it makes it really accessible for clients. It means they can call us, any day of the week, and they can call us 2 years later when the dispute is still going on. But it also, can put us in harm's way in a way that we didn't used to be.
Thanks so much, Julia. Our final question, because I'm mindful that we're nearly at time. Simone has noted the cross-border nature of a lot of this work. Certainly hazards and disasters don't know borders, right? And we've seen this certainly up in the Northern Rivers, crossing Queensland, New South Wales borders, but really throughout the country. Do you have any reflections on the challenges and the potential for collaborations in cross-border spaces, particularly given that a lot of the kind of management and coordination is state-based?
I can jump in there.
Thanks.
Certainly in the bushfires, we had it was both down in Victoria and up in Queensland that we were working closely with CLCs and legal aid commissions during that time. Of course, insurance law is national, so we can share resources and share skills, but certainly there are challenges around the state-based issues like tenancy and the different grants. We work pretty closely with the other legal aid commissions, and there's actually a thing they've set up called the Commonwealth DLAG, which is a disaster legal assistance group. And Sharon Keith, who runs Disaster Legal Help Victoria, which is a collaboration of legal aid and CLCs down there, also runs a thing called the DLAP, another acronym that is basically practitioners working in this space. So at that level, we do work fairly closely about cross-border issues and sharing resources. We're regularly sharing resources as, for example, most recently as things are happening up in North Queensland. But yeah, definitely. And Mel might have more to say about this, about the importance of the local CLCs and regional officers and the relationships they have on the ground with their counterparts just over the border. But it's a great question.
Mel,
I'll just add, something quickly is that from an advocate's point of view, thinking about law reform and where can we have quick wins and deal with systemic issues, COVID also brought the gift of Zoom.
Yeah.
And it is so easy now to set up quick collaborative groups. In the bushfires, we started having weekly meetings with ASIC and other consumer advocates so that we could in real time be passing on information about insurance claims and what was working, what wasn't, what could get fixed quickly, what was a bigger long-term issue. And we still do it. Consumer advocates still meet every week and talk about what are the issues we're seeing, across financial services. So I think when a disaster happens and it's cross-border, I think reach out to the relationships you have, set something up, have it be weekly, and it can and have it be an open invite. And anyone who wants to come along can come along and share problems they're having and share solutions. Because it just makes collaboration so easy now that we have these virtual environments that basically everybody was trained to use very quickly over COVID. And it just makes it easy to share information and solutions in real time.
Thank you so much, Julia. We're at time, and it was really interesting. even in that last question, to hear some of the themes really reiterated throughout the research, the panel discussions, and the questions coming from all of you in the audience about collaboration, relationships, working against that kind of siloing, whether it's a geographical one or a kind of disciplinary one. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today. And a really huge thanks to Julia, Sally, and Mel for being so generous, not only with your time, but being so generous with your wisdom and experiences. Thank you to the research team and to our many collaborators and partners. The kind of research that we do at the foundation really doesn't have legs unless we are partnering and collaborating with all of you. We offer up the evidence, but it really only becomes valuable and has impact through the work that all of you are doing. So we're really grateful for you joining us today, but grateful for your ongoing collaboration, and certainly really love to hear from what's going on the ground, and happy to share more resources. I think Alice has shared our contact email address, the research@lawfoundation.net.au, and really happy to hear from you in the future. Thanks so much, everyone.